All right, we are live. My name is David Ortiz, and I'm running for the Colorado State House here in House District 38. We are going to be discussing education today. We have an amazing panel with us. I'm going to go ahead and give people a few minutes to start tuning in, so please enjoy the smooth jazz sounds of Michael Haggins with Daybreak. All right, so we've got about 13 people with us, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is David Ortiz. I'm running for the Colorado State House here in HD 38, which is Littleton and the western parts of Centennial. We are, and in the spirit of that, we have an amazing panel for you today, board members, educators to discuss education, kind of what it's like in Colorado. Anyways, a very unique environment that there is in Colorado, but especially now in a time of COVID-19. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and go into introductions and allow Rob to start us off. So
thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about education. I'm Robert Reichardt. I'm on the school board for Littleton Public Schools. I've been on the board now for 5 years. I'm also a parent. I have two girls in high school in Littleton. And my day job is I work in education policy research. So I do research across the country about things to help improve education, both in Colorado and across the country. So thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity.
Outstanding. All right, Linley, if you'll follow that up.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity to come on today and talk about public education. It's incredibly important and near and dear to my heart. I currently serve on the Littleton Public Schools Board of Education with Robert. This is my first term. I was elected and sworn in November. And it's a heck of a time to be the newest member on the school board. Like Robert, I also am a parent. I have a now 6th grader who will be going to Euclid and a now 8th grader who will also be going to Euclid. I grew up in Littleton, graduated from Littleton High School, and came back, and I'm happy to be serving my community that I grew up in. So thank you.
Great. And before I hand it over to Amanda, the great thing I love about this program is it allows people to give shout outs and say hello. So Dina says, hi, thanks for having this. I've had the pleasure to meet and support David, supporting him here. Arapahoe County, I'm a former teacher. So it's just saying hi to you guys, giving a shout out. All right, Amanda, if you want to take it from here.
Sure. I'm Amanda Crosby. I'm a social studies teacher in Littleton. I started in 2001, and since, for the past 4 years, I've been the president of LEA, which is our local teachers association, and really appreciate being here and the invitation, David, and I look forward to the discussion.
All right, thanks for that, Amanda. Bryan.
Hi, I'm Bryan Lindstrom. I'm a history teacher at Hinckley High School in Aurora. I've lived in Aurora, Colorado my entire life. I've been a teacher in Aurora for 5 years, and I've been in education for 9. I formerly sat on the board of Aurora Education Association. I'm involved very politically with the union. I also organize with Colorado People's Action, Working Families Party. But I am here as an individual, not as those, but very passionate about education, labor, and intersections with housing and those things. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Bryan. Mr. Ivey.
And good afternoon, everyone. And thanks a lot, David, for having me on here as well, along with this great panel. My name is Marques Ivey. I am currently in my first term on the Board of Education for Aurora Public Schools. This is first term, entering my third year, if you will. I was the previous president of the board the first 2 years, and going into this third year, I'm the treasurer now. But I have lived in Colorado for 18 years. It was 18 years as of last Wednesday, actually. As soon as I graduated law school, me and my wife, and at the time, my one child, my oldest, had graduated law school. And the next day we packed up and drove here to Colorado, and I started work that following, like 2 days later, as a public defender for state of Colorado in the trial office. So I've been a trial attorney, but I have my own firm and been doing primarily criminal defense work for the past 18 years, and own firm for 15 years, and love Aurora Public Schools. All three of my kids will graduate. Well, the first one did. My eldest graduated. He will be a sophomore now in college at UNLV, and then I got a daughter who is going into her senior year at Vista Peak, and so and I got an 8th grader who's going to be a freshman in Vista Peak. So they all started at kindergarten, and they all graduate in APS, which I'm extremely proud of. So that's where it is right now, and just really here to support and help and speak. And I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Outstanding. Thank you for that. And just to let you guys know, Ilana Spiegel is joining us. She sends a shout out to y'all saying, hey. So, all right, let's get into it. I want to open this up with a little bit of a softball pitch and talk about what inspired you to get involved in education. Here's a little secret about me, which y'all might not know, but my actual dream job is to be a teacher, either a college professor or a high school teacher. After I'm done doing the work, like that's where I want to end up eventually. So whoever wants to take it from here, please tell us what inspired you to get involved in education.
I can go first. So when my daughters were in preschool, we found an amazing program that is 50% typical, 50% special needs, and it's a fully integrated program. And the experience that my kids had there, and seeing the interaction that they had with their fellow students, who they still have friends from those days, and I have some of my most treasured friends from those days as well. It just got me going, and I joined the board of that preschool and served on that board for, I think, 9 years, until the day before my election here. So that was what got me started. And then when we got into elementary school, I got on the accountability committee, which serves a similar role, kind of an advisory role in the school versus the PTO, which also is incredibly important. But the accountability committee was kind of more up my alley and led to just more involvement throughout the district. And it's one of the best ways to get involved if your kids are in school, and to really understand how things are and what could be done better. And so it was just a really neat kind of natural progression for me. I'm an engineer by degree. I went to the Colorado School of Mines and worked as an engineer for a while. And now this is my full-time role, being a mom and serving on the school board. So I just would encourage anyone to get involved in any way that they feel comfortable, and you never know where that's going to lead you.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That's really cool. And we're glad to have you. All right. Who wants to go next? Who wants to tell their story about what inspired them to get into education?
I'll go. I am married to a teacher. I've been married for 21 years as of this past December. And so in college, when I met my soon-to-be wife after 3 or 4 rejections, I realized just how much and how important education was. And so from there, that was her thing. She taught, and through law school and so forth, she was a teacher. And then when we had our firstborn, he was a kindergartner in Vaughn Elementary School, where my wife had actually started her career here in Aurora. And I felt that I needed to be involved in his education, and I needed to be there every step of the way. So that really started my journey into the educational realm. And I think I started with the accountability committee, and then I was put on to PTA, which I didn't know what that really was. And from there through PTA is nationally, statewide, and internationally has really kept me involved in it. So for me, the other aspect of it was being a criminal defense attorney, and you get sick of being reactive, because when the kids come to you in the juvenile sense, they're already in the system. So the goal is to try to find a way to get them out, or try to figure out what we can do to best serve them. So that was the reactive side. Being on the board gives me the ability to be on the proactive side, if you will, although I'm one of 7 people, but it gives me that ability to start shaping change from the top, if you will, on down. So that's where it is for me. I hate to sound cliche-ish, but education is the key, simply
Amen.
put.
Awesome, Marques. Thank you. All right.
I'll go. So I knew I wanted to be a teacher in high school. I didn't know what I wanted to teach, but a lot of it had to do with things like, I grew up with my dad. He wasn't a big, like, you have to do this, that, and the other. He kind of led by example. I remember, us pulling over to the side of the road when I'm 8 years old to push cars out of the snow. Like, that investment in the community kind of got invested in me without it being like the finger wag from my dad. It was the demonstration from my dad. Kind of instilled that mentality of community. And then I going through high school, having various coaches who you make a strong connection with, or teachers, I wanted to then do that same thing that I received as a student, as a teacher. But some of that has transformed since I've been a teacher, right? I got into teaching specifically for the community. I stay in teaching, and for lack of a better word, I've been radicalized by teaching, because I wasn't involved in politics until I became a teacher. I got involved in union work and politics and all those things because of what was happening in the classroom, because of everything, like all the intersections that go on and connect to education. So I joined for the community, and I stay in for the community, but with a different lens, I guess.
Gotcha. Appreciate that, Bryan. All right. Who's left?
So I come from a long line of educators. One of my grandmothers taught in Clark County her whole career, and my other grandmother taught in Mapleton her whole career. My mom taught in Moffat County. My stepmother taught in Air Academy High School. So going into education was a pretty part of my life. I taught in the Peace Corps for a couple of years, and when I came back, I decided to pursue a little bit more education. And so then I work professionally in education, and I give a lot of advice to policymakers. And so part of the reason I wanted to be on the board was to see if I could take my own advice. And then it's about service to the community. I mean, I think communities really are a product of the people who step up in those communities and try to lead. And I appreciate everybody in our community who tries to help make it a better place. And I'm just trying to do my part, carry my load.
All right. Thanks, Rob. All right, Amanda.
All right. So I come from a line of educators as well. My grandfather, after he retired from the Army, was a social studies teacher in Colorado Springs for many, many years. And then my grandmother and mother were both trained school librarians. My grandmother worked for many years at the Air Force Academy. And then my mother actually was one of the librarians who helped open Gateway High School. And was actually there the year before it opened, buying all the books and getting ready. I just sort of thought I'd eventually become a teacher, but I did some things in college, tutoring kids. And then I think the big moment in my life was when I was a junior in college. I went on semester at sea, and kind of the most important moment, we had the opportunity to have Archbishop Desmond Tutu come onto the ship and speak with us. Wow. And he talked about living a life that had meaning, living a life of service to others. And I thought, well, why do I need to have another career first? I could just start out in education. So that was kind of my decision. That meant I had to go back to my senior in college and change all my courses over and try to get all my prereqs done for grad school. And then I kind of got to mid-career being a social studies teacher, and because of a series of things that happened, I just sort of decided that I needed to be a voice for educators, because CEA had a slogan, learning conditions or teaching conditions. And it just sort of became really apparent to me that until teachers had a strong voice and until teachers could stand up for themselves, they really couldn't stand up for students. And so if you want to fight for kids, the only way to do that is to be in a strong position yourself. So that was what led me to be a association president.
Outstanding. And I love that idea of service, especially as we start heading into Memorial Day weekend. So I love that story. Thanks for that. Let's get right into it. So I'm going to identify 3 issues that kind of are on the forefront of my radar, and you guys can start picking and choosing where, like, choose your own adventure, I guess is what we'll say. So some of the top 3 issues that I've identified that impact education. One is funding. We're very unique in Colorado, and now in a time of COVID-19, we're looking at a $3.3 billion shortfall. So funding is one of the choose your own adventures. Next, let's talk about the achievement gap and how we diversify the workforce of teachers, how representation matters, not just among teachers, but also on our school boards. How do we recruit and retain teachers? So kind of that is its own thing. And the third, let's talk about mental health. Rob, you mentioned that earlier. Mental health is a huge issue across our state, really, but especially here in the South Denver metro area. But let's take it from there. Who wants to charge in and pick one? Don't all jump in at once now.
Well, finance is going to be on the front burner for the next 3 or 4 years. We're not going to recover quickly, and people talk about education being a third of the state budget, and so I think it's okay. The state needs to live within its, it needs to balance a budget, and so education budgets will go down. But the lack of flexibility that comes from the combination of, and resilience within the funding system that comes from the combination of Tabor and Gallagher really hamstring our ability to recover. And particularly Gallagher, which is very complex, but it really limits our ability to access property taxes. And our property taxes, as a share of our funding for K-12 has declined since the passage of Tabor. And property taxes provide a relatively stable base of funding. And because of our constitutional constraints from Tabor and Gallagher, we're less prepared to survive a recession in good shape. And so without dealing with our constitutional restrictions, we're always going to be behind the 8 ball as a state. And our education is going to suffer because of it.
I'd love to piggyback off of that. I think those things also add in something we talk about a lot less, because is the inequity that it then leads to with the way we do mill levies. Because who can pass mill levies in the state of Colorado? The more affluent parts of the state. So they end up passing mill levies to fund their students, but to hell with the students everywhere else around the state. That's why we can pass mill levies fairly easy in certain areas, but we can't pass statewide tax increases. That is, along with unfunded mandates, things like SB 10191, where we're essentially pulling teachers out of the classroom to evaluate teachers. It increases class size. It reduces the amount of choices you have. The big focus on testing cuts down electives as well. We end up doubling up in math and English classes. So some of those unfunded mandates really hit us in a way that, when you're not close to it, you don't necessarily realize.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can also piggyback on both what Robert and Bryan both said, it's Tabor, it's Gallagher, and it's Amendment 23 as well. Amendment 23 was designed to increase funding, but it hamstringed. And so Gallagher was designed to say that, funding was through state property taxes, 60%, and then the state provided the 40. Those numbers have kind of flipped. Now it's the state providing 60, which eats up a chunk of the general budget, and 40% from property taxes. So it hasn't kept up. That combined with the inability to use the Tabor funds and having to return money that with Amendment 23 saying, well, you got to increase it, but where does it come from? It's a big mess. And so we'll get emails as a board, we'll get calls, or if somebody sees you and they say, you got to give more money to this. And it's like, love to. So this is the size of the pie, and we have to figure out how to work within that size of the pie. And it's tough because there are mandates that I believe should wholly be funded. You got to take care of your teachers. My wife's one, so I know you got to take care of the curriculum so that the kids are getting the most rigorous curriculum. That's expensive. And so all of that factors into this. It's right now, until we change the underlying issues within the Constitution, this is what we're stuck with right now.
No, and I want to piggyback off that real quick, because you brought up a great point where, the inversion of the flip on the state funding education, and where do we have to get that from? Because if Tabor ties our hands, we are cannibalizing something, and guess where that's coming from? It's higher education. Back in the 90s, the state was funding 65% of higher education programs, and the students had to pay their tuition covered 35%. Now that's flipped, where the state can only fund 35% of our higher education here in Colorado, and the students have to make up for the most of it. It's made up by out-of-state tuition mostly, and then Bryan, you bring up a great issue around equity. If we're going to make systemic change, because mill levy is an option for some, but really it's our workaround around something that is creating the systemic inequity and the shortfall consistently in funding. And, this is my own personal opinion, so I'll say this too. No other state in this country has a law like Tabor, red or blue, not one. And right now, when we're dealing with the shortfall, we don't have a rainy day fund. People keep confusing the reserve with the rainy day fund. They're not the same thing. And Tabor does not allow us to be fiscally responsible enough to have a rainy day fund in this case where we need it. So, just wanted to piggyback off that. I don't know if you guys wanted to connect or if you guys wanted to move into something else.
I'd like to just add a little bit on that too. One thing that I think is important for people to understand is the fact that we still last year had a $567 million budget stabilization factor statewide is evidence that the state of Colorado economy never recovered from the 2008-2009 recession. And we were still trying to get caught back up 10, 12 years later. And so now when we're going into this and we're looking at the massive cuts that are coming, we're starting at a very negative place. In LPS alone, our budget stabilization factor was $9 million last year. And if we're looking at the potential of that doubling, the impact that has it's immeasurable at this point, and it's pretty unsettling. And so I think that's something that a lot of people don't really understand, because our system is so complicated and because it takes an effort to learn about it and to understand how all of these different parts and pieces connect and why it's created the system that we're in. And my hope is that this will inspire people to take the time to learn about it and understand why funding is so tight.
And just to offer a resource, because this can seem like a big issue, but in my experience, the website of this organization, they're a nonpartisan organization that does the best job in explaining individually Amendment 23, Gallagher and Tabor, but then also talks about the unintended consequences and how they interact, is Building a Better Colorado. So look them up. I depended on them. They helped educate me because, I'm new to Colorado in 2014, but they really helped me out. So Building a Better Colorado, definitely.
The other thing that I would add is that I think if school still operated the way that school operated when we were in school, maybe these funding problems wouldn't be creating the level of problem that they're creating right now. But we've made great strides in the past 20, 30 years toward greater equity, toward bringing in all sorts of students with various kinds of disabilities into the public school system, moving kids out of institutions into public schools. And so we address a whole range of social emotional needs, of educational needs. A lot of students who decades ago didn't go to school, weren't part of the system, didn't take services, do. And so it's very important, I think, for us to keep trying to educate the public. The school does not look like it did 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I would say even 10 years ago. And so the cost of actually operating a modern school system, of feeding students, of educating them, yes, but in many ways taking care of a lot of societal functions for those students and their families, which I guess if this crisis showed us anything, it's how central schools are to the life of children and keeping some students literally alive. And so I think people don't quite understand how many services we offer and how really good we are at stretching a dime. But there is a breaking point. And I mentioned that part of the reason I got into this work was a series of events and just the social emotional struggles of our students. I just had people saying, I just can't do this job anymore. I got in this job to be a teacher, not a mental health professional. And yet that's pretty much most of what I do all day. And I'm not equipped for this. So the problem really just is very expansive.
Does anybody want to piggyback off that? Because I got my own feelings on that as well.
Yeah, I just have a brief comment, and that's how our society works. When a problem in society, a new problem comes to the forefront, we ask teachers, police, and firefighters to do more. 80 years ago, police were peace workers. Now they're mental health social workers, EMTs, et cetera, et cetera. The same transition happens for teachers. 80 years ago when the subject was the forefront, now it's being a parent, a mental health professional, a social worker, for some daycare. Like, we are the cover everything business. And it's just, we don't have the training expertise or the salary to continue expecting that transition, which is why we have what we call the slow walkout of teachers. We've lost so many teachers. The average lifespan of a teacher, I think, is 5 years in the U.S., about 3 years in Colorado. The people, they're slowly leaving the profession, and I think these are part of the reasons why.
I think the mental health aspect is a huge part of the reason why. And the only analogy that I can make to it, my own experience, is having been a case manager after Hurricane Katrina. Initially, I was brought on as a Spanish-speaking case manager. If you've ever worked with the migrant community, it's like, hey, I've got a job in LA. I just need a bus ticket. And they won't even ask me for a plane ticket. It was just get me there. I've got it from here. Or I've got a new job in Houston. I just need help with 1 or 2 months rent. So, by April, I had closed all my cases and started working with English speakers coming out of New Orleans. And they were dealing with a lot of mental health issues from that experience, not to mention generational trauma of inequity in the communities that they were coming from. And I am not trained as a mental health care specialist. That's what burned me out. That's when I felt like the little boy in the dam trying to hold back the tide. That I was not equipped for this. I am not the right person to do this job for sure. So I imagine that's how y'all are feeling. That's the sentiment that I'm getting from you all.
No, I think that's absolutely true. And I wanted to do a little bit of a segue. You talked about the representation within the teacher workforce and the importance of representation amongst teachers and representation on the school boards. And the reality is that problem is also related to our financial issues. The decline in state funding for higher ed has made it easy to preserve the privilege that many white families brought with them into Colorado, into higher ed. And, in my professional role, I've done 2 different studies for the state around the lack of minority teachers. And the issues is really that we need to help people get their college degrees to help them become teachers. And instead, by kind of preserving the privilege of the past through not funding higher education, we really have a big challenge diversifying our teacher workforce. And by not funding higher ed, we're reinforcing that lack of representation. And so a lot of it all does circle back to money. And
I think it's a cultural thing too. We have a cultural expectation that you have to pay your dues. We don't value entry-level employment in this country. So we expect, if you're going to be a teacher, you have to work for free to student teach, like that expectation. And that, like you said, is a very privileged position. But part of it, I think, is that this paradigm that we have that not all labor has value. We don't respect all workers in our society, and they are workers. They're doing the job that I'm doing for free. They just happen to have me there to support them.
No, you're absolutely right. That the teaching profession is a profession where we make the teachers themselves pay for all of their own training. And there's not a lot of support for helping people get to that place. And while there are some residency models where teachers will get some salary while they're working, those residency models have no sustainable funding model anywhere in the country. And so if we want to help more people, more diversity in our teaching, we have to make it easier for people to become teachers.
Spot on. And yep. Sorry. Go ahead. No,
yours.
Spot on. My sister is a teacher, and it was a difficult path for her to get through it. As a Black woman, it was difficult. Black men getting into the teaching profession is difficult for some reason, in that sense that they don't feel like it can support the necessities of their life. In that sense, if I'm going to teach, I need to be able to make enough money to, live and whatnot. But also in that same spot, in that same aspect, if you got a family, it's that aspect. My sister has a son. And so there was always that struggle in that point of, okay, I can student teach for free, but I also have to work a job to make ends meet. And so, yes, they are walking away. We passed a resolution in Aurora to look at trying to find ways to hire more teachers of color. The problem with that I think about it now, is that we need to also do something that provides more administrators of color just the same. And I'm not talking about I'm not talking about just teachers, but administrators, Black, Hispanic, all the colors of the rainbow, if you will, who are administrators that can be seen by these students as, oh, I can strive for that as well. I can be a teacher. Okay, but I can also strive to be an administrator. And it's difficult right now. And unfortunately in our district, we let a few go. And I don't know why. I'm still trying to figure that out. And I'll tell you right now, it angers me. And so if we're not filling our duties, if you will, then we look like hypocrites. But there have to be ways. We have to make it easier for minorities to get into this profession, because you all heard the studies that when students see someone who looks like them, oftentimes they learn a lot more better. It's more relatable. And that's no diss against any teacher. My wife is white. And she's raising multiracial kids. And so she understands that I understand that I can do this, but I also understand that those who look like you may also get you over that hump. So you're right. We need to do something. Brian, Robert, Linley, y'all pointed it out. We got to figure something out to make this happen.
Outstanding. And let's go on with this topic of diversification and talk about diversifying curriculum. In order to get students more interested in the things they're learning about, where they see authors, writers, figures in history that look like them, men, women of color. So, and the school board can speak to this. How much authority or free range do you all have in diversifying that curriculum?
So thank you, Marques. I appreciate that. There's two different components of that, right? So Colorado is very unique in that the curriculum is definitely within the boundary of school district authority versus the state authority. And so school districts have much more authority in Colorado around curriculum than the state. But then the fundamental challenge is who knows best. And should we trust teachers to come to the table with a enlightened view around what they should be presenting to their students, or should we, as a board, be mandating that? And there's always a tension within the board. I feel like Littleton is doing an okay job on that, in trying to balance the expertise of teachers and the expert, really the value, not the values, the perspectives of the board in curriculum. But by definition, that balance has some rough edges. There'll be places where teachers don't agree with some of the decisions we make, and there'll be places where the board is a little uncomfortable with some of the things that teachers do. So there's a little bit of a tension, but I think we're doing an okay job at trying to balance the expertise of the teachers and the perspectives that the board brings to the table. And Amanda, I look forward to hearing your perspective on that.
Well, I would say, the latest literature adoption I think was an example of teachers and administrators and the school board kind of all approaching the topic with an open mind. I was very surprised at some of the titles that people brought forward and proposed, and that the school board approved. And so I think we all have to be willing to work together to take those kind of risks and then have each other's backs. Because it's something like literature adoption can certainly be something that drives a wedge in the community. But if we all as a united front say we need to diversify the kinds of reading materials that our students have so that they can see themselves represented, transgender students, for example, that's an area where we can work together. And if we're all on the same page, I feel like the chance of somebody driving a wedge and creating a wedge issue for a school board race is less likely, because the teachers, the administrators, and the school board are all saying, we all think that this is the right way to go.
And it raises the importance of who's on the board. These local down ballot elections set the tone for what goes on in this community around thinking about diversity. And it's important for people to step up and have their values represented. And we have I think a really a board that's very excited about thinking about diversity within the curriculum. But that's because people stepped up. And we don't agree on everything, but I think we do agree on that.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other?
I was just going to say, and I was really interested in Bryan's perspective actually with the curriculum and how he sees it from sitting as a teacher to the board. I know how I feel as a board member. We're presented with some options, and they give us a rundown, and then we're supposed to vote on it. And but then when you actually hear from other teachers and administrators, that's not really the route we want to go. It's a tough position to be in. I guess I have this belief that the schools, the teachers, and the administrators of their schools know their students best. And if they believe that certain curriculum is appropriate, I'm actually interested in looking in the future of giving those schools more autonomy to make some of those decisions. But it's kind of a tough position to be in because, it's bulk buying. Well, we got to buy this for 65 schools. So, here's what it's costing, and we're going to give it to everybody, although that may not be what everybody needs. So that's the tough part. But I was definitely interested in your perspective, Bryan, as well.
And you expect it to last for 10 years, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
And I taught both English and social studies. So, what you pick for English, novels are a little bit cheaper than textbooks. But I've never used a textbook to teach until I taught IB where I have no choice. But because they tend to be a very Eurocentric mindset in our textbooks, they tend to, because you can only fit this much of a blurb about this topic, they tend to be very watered down versions of what actually happened. So, me and Marcus, Carlos, but me and Carlos have been trying to modify the U.S. history curriculum for about 2 years because the way in which it's written, it tends to be from a more upper class white perspective. And we've been trying to change it to more through the lens of race, class, and gender. Because when you write for example, in U.S. history, there's a unit on the Roaring '20s. Who are the 20s roaring for, making sure you're actually bringing in those perspectives of how this is impacting various people, because we tend to focus on the impact of people with money predominantly in units like that. So I'm fortunate enough. I teach one IB class, but then I teach the upper level electives. So I teach African American history and I teach Latin American history. So I write my own curriculum, and I do take it through that lens of critical race theory and those various perspectives. But like that's because I have the freedom to do so. When, in social studies, our 9th and 10th grade curriculum is a lot more difficult to have that autonomy. Marques, you're switching sides on me. You were over here, now you're over here. So
Well,
like,
yeah.
because just to be honest, like, Marques, Carlos and I, we tend to be pretty outspoken and not afraid to make waves. So sometimes you're not just fighting with the school board or with the principal, you're also fighting with other teachers who are very attached to the curriculum. So it makes some difficulties to make sure you're bringing in those perspectives. Because, I would say where I teach, probably, I think everybody can identify individual acts of oppression, and probably about 40% can identify institutional oppression, but very few recognize things like internalized or implicit bias, and recognizing that in themselves and being able to own that, I am taking this lens. I do need to hear from these various perspectives. So
right.
I know I'm saying a lot, but not really saying anything. I think it's more a philosophical struggle of tackling those things. But that's just the battle of what it takes to actually make those changes. Is you do have to battle. It's a battle up, no matter what. If you're fighting for equity, because the system isn't designed for that.
It's like being in class again. So for sure. I appreciate that. Anybody else want to piggyback that? Or, I've got a couple issues here too that we can talk about, let you guys choose. One is what is the toughest part about this work for you? And what are some of the largest hurdles that we're currently facing?
So
I can tackle that one.
Go ahead, Linley.
For me, I think the toughest part, and we as a board have talked about this, we all have a picture in our minds of what fully funded education could look like and the potential that's there, and to continue to struggle with all of the issues that we've discussed in a very limited funding capacity, and kind of seeing the steps that have been taken and the issues that have failed and things like that. And so that's really hard for me, because I want to see our kids have the opportunity to have a fully funded education. Our current now 11th graders have never experienced that, because that's how long we've been in this position. And that makes me really sad. I think that we in our district are incredibly fortunate to have amazing, dedicated teachers who give so much of themselves personally and their time and their energy. And they are a huge component of what makes our district so strong. And I'm very thankful for that. And I look forward to the day when we can pay them what they deserve, and that we can, reach the point where public education is valued enough that it's funded enough to pay these people what they actually deserve, because right now they are not getting anywhere close to it. And as much as we try our best to balance our giant budget and all the parts and pieces, we have a set amount of money, and it's very, very difficult.
Yeah, for me, speaking from the board perspective, the toughest part is being at the board perspective and being told you shouldn't get in the weeds, which you shouldn't, from this level. You're not supposed to, but it's hard sometimes, because you get folks that'll call you or email you and be like, X, Y, Z, and then you have to give them this sad answer of, I hear what you're saying. Here, let me direct you to who you need to speak to. And so it's like I'm punting the ball down the field versus giving them what they want, if I can give them what they want. And many times it's not. You have one employee, that's your superintendent. And so you have to direct them up this quote unquote chain of command. Forgive me for using that terminology, but you have to direct them up that way. And so that's the hard part, because they're like, well, you're the board, you have control over this, take care of this. And you have to say, I can't, but let me get you to who can. So that's the hardest part, I think, for me, being at this level at this stage.
Yeah, the hardest part for me is the social emotional health issues. Quite frankly, it's going to the funerals. With this spring, ironically, has been pleasantly quiet in that arena. And, schools are the biggest government agency in communities, and we absolutely have a role in dealing with supporting the social emotional health of everyone in our community. But this is absolutely a problem that's bigger than us. While I think we as a district, and I think all of our teachers do a great job doing what they can, we by ourselves cannot solve this problem. And as a parent, I see high schoolers are extremely stressed out, and they're stressed out for a really good reason. I had suicidal friends 35 years ago in Colorado Springs. Having emotionally unstable teenagers is not new, but the pressure on children and adults, that is the connection between education and economic security that has increased over the past 20 years, I think really has raised the stakes for our children, and they know it. And that pressure, I see it in my own teenagers, and I see it in a lot of other teenagers. And so we need help with that problem as a community, dealing with the social emotional issues that our kids are dealing with. It's not that they're snowflakes. I think they are in really high stress situations, and it's not because all of their parents are helicopter parents. It's a bigger societal issue than the parents or the kids' fault.
And I'd piggyback on that. I would say that's the most difficult thing for me. I mean, I think when you're doing a job, any kind of service job, there has to be that joy in it. If you lose the joy, you can't keep doing it, whether that's being a nurse, a policeman, a firefighter, whatever it is. Like, there has to be joy. And I think the mental health issues, the violence, and those things, like, they take away the joy. And, then we get blamed, and we're doing everything we can, like literally thinking way outside the box. And so trying to keep that joy for people, trying to keep them thinking about the reason they got into the profession is really, really a challenge with all the mental health struggles that we face daily.
Well, this is why I think representation and elected leaders at all levels of government matter. Because, I mean, Rob, to piggyback off what you were saying, I'm sure it's a lot worse now, but I remember being in high school and my freshman year, and my dad sitting me down and being like, hey, we don't have money. So if you're going to go to college, guess what? Scholarship or bust. And so that was always there on the back. I mean, that's why I doubled up in honors math classes. That's why I got to calculus by the time I got to my senior year, and I did get a scholarship. But here's the thing, though. Like, they give you a full ride scholarship at $350 a credit hour. Every year they raise tuition, but they don't raise your scholarship. And I know that the cost of higher education has ballooned, because within the 4 years that I was there, it went from $350 a credit hour to almost $800 a credit hour. So just the immense pressure around the inequity of opportunities, yet how important education is to secure more of those opportunities is real. And it's burdensome, not just for the students, but for the parents too. It's huge. Let's bring this topic. We're coming up on 10 minutes, so we always do a lightning round just to give everybody an opportunity to get to know you guys. So we're just going to throw some questions out there. Simple answers, poor favor. Let's start with what your favorite outdoor activity is here in Colorado.
Gardening.
Any outdoor sport for me: volleyball, football, dodgeball, softball, kickball, you name it. I still do it.
All right.
Mine used to be snowboarding, but my recent hip replacement and 80-year-old other hip have limited that for now. So I'm trying to find a new one. Right now it's walking my dog.
Maybe we can get you into mono skiing. No hip required, I promise.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, it's the socially distanced fire pit with BYOB. That's my favorite activity.
Club in education?
What?
I said we call that the FAC club in education.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, well, I identify myself as the leader of the Hot Mess Express, and we meet every Friday around the fire pit, 6 feet apart. So.
Yeah, so Colorado has a pretty big beach volleyball scene because we have indoor beach volleyball. So I do that year round, and disc golf is another big outdoor activity for me.
Cool. All right, let's go into, we got educators here, so I can't not ask this question. Favorite book and why?
I'll go first. A book I read over and over, it's just so funny, is Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe. It's what the movie Fried Green Tomatoes was based on, but really, really fascinating. It's hilarious, but it's also a really interesting look into the world of people who don't fit in.
I'm not as sophisticated. I'm Angels and Demons by Dan Brown. I'm a Dan Brown guy, so anything he writes, I read. And I usually read it like in a week. So anything he writes, but Angels and Demons for me is my favorite.
That's a good one. I don't have an all-time favorite because I just like my taste in music. It varies depending on my mood. Right now, I'm really loving the Ink trilogy, and it's so good. My middle schooler got me into it, and it's all about pushing the boundaries and not following what you've been told that you are, and actually learning who you are.
Yeah, asking a favorite book is like asking what your favorite song is. It's really difficult. But probably the most impactful book for me was the first time I read Plato's Republic. That was very awakening for me. My favorite book to teach with is called Family by C. California Cooper. I use that in my African American history class. There's no better way to teach the long-term impact of chattel slavery than that book, because it shows both the impact as individuals, but also the impact on family and those relationships and how those things still carry out post-slavery.
What's it called again?
It's called Family by C. California Cooper. I use that as a historical fiction book I use in my history class. I guess I'm a weird history teacher because I use fiction. But what woke me up to history wasn't history. It was like movies like V for Vendetta is what got me involved in caring about it.
So I read a lot of different books. The cheesy book I'm going to put forward is Little Britches, which is written by a Littleton author about being a son of a single mother in Littleton. And I read that when I was a son of a single mom in Craig over on the Western Slope. And it was, it made Littleton out to be a magical place, and it's turned out to be a great place to raise my kids. So, it's a little cheesy, but it's a great book.
Well, it's a local author. I got to look into that too. And if we're going to talk about, I'm spacing on his name, and that's why I was looking at my bookshelf, because I was like, is it up there? But Dog Stars is written by a Colorado author. And the thing that was most unique about it, and this probably lets you in on how slow I am, is for some reason it started seeming disjointed. So I thought, like, am I messing up? Am I not understanding? But as the illness progresses in the story, he's trying to give you perspective on the way people are thinking when they're suffering from this illness. So I found it really unique because of that. He was an aviator, so he was describing some of the sights from the sky. And like I said, before we deploy, we do our high altitude mountain training here. So it was a really cool book to read for sure. Awesome. Well, we have another 6 minutes. So I don't know if you guys want to, if there's a topic you really want to hit on before we go into closing thoughts. Otherwise, I could name one more topic and then we can go into closing thoughts.
I have one.
All right. Yeah, go. Yeah.
So with everything moving forward, we're in a very difficult time right now. And we're looking at what school's going to look like in the fall and how that's going to be. And, looking at all the different options that are on the table. And as a parent, I get the uncertainty and the fear and the questioning of what that's going to look like for my student. But really just a request for the general public that you engage with your local school district, whether it's your district administration, your LEA, your school board, but do so in a meaningful and respectful manner. We're all under a lot of stress, and we all are just as concerned about all of our students. And I think that the best conversations start with respect and have that foundation there. And that's the way that we're going to move forward together as a team, and that we can all work together. And I think that, we are very willing as a school board and as a district to engage with our community, and we want that feedback. And we're hopeful that it can move forward in a positive direction.
Thank you, Linley.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, think about it. You guys are given of your life, whether it's the extra leadership role that you're taking in LEA or AEA, or whether you're running for board and then being on the board. Running for office is not easy. And then being in elected office is not easy either. But that's what you choose to pick, right? Like, you take that on. But it's always more helpful when people are very clear and respectful with their message, because then you can do something with that. If someone's just going to get in your face and shout, like I've had that happen to me before. I mean, being in the military, it's part of the training, right? They're going to get in your face and shout. You're just going to have to let it wash over you and be okay with it. But even as an elected leader, I mean, you don't know where that person's coming from, right? So you take it on, but like, you can't really turn that into a solution. So I think that's great to have everyone to keep in mind, that to be respectful and understand we're all going through this together, this $3.3 billion shortfall, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm going to have my property taxes raised. I'm on a fixed income, but guess what? As a tax-paying patriot, I want kids in Colorado to have healthcare and their education paid for. Like, this is just another thing. We're all going to go through this together. We're going to make difficult choices moving forward. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, and just kind of a piggyback on that too, when we're looking at, as of now, unknown budget cuts and what that's going to look like. But then we're also looking at how can we effectively educate our kids starting in the fall. And every single one of the scenarios that is set up is going to cost us more money. And it's going to be even harder for us as school districts to manage our budgets and to do so in a way that is going to provide the education that we want to provide, and that we're in it, for that reason, to provide that quality education. And so that's just another good thing to keep in mind when, you're engaging with community members and having conversations, and just remember that this isn't an easy puzzle for any of us to solve. And we all are working really hard for the right reason. And, we can get through it as long as we do it all together.
And we as voters too, on the other side, like, we need to take a hard look at some of these policies that we have in place. Like, do we like the idea that maybe legislators can't, just on a whim reach into our pockets? Sure. But again, no other state in this country has a law like Tabor, because it's not just, it's more than that. It is much more than that. And we really need to be honest about how we're going to pay for some of these programs we want. It's like someone that says they're going to eat whatever they want. I'm going to have 3 shots of tequila and 2 beers every night, but I want to have a 6-pack and be able to run a 5-minute mile. Well, look, we're going to have to start making difficult decisions here that are really going to speak to our values. We're going to have to pay for these programs if we really, truly want them. And I think a lot of parents with their kids at home are really starting to gain some insight on the service, the all-around service that teachers provide. My sister has 3 boys at home, and let me tell you, there are days where she's like,
I think, that I really appreciate Linley bringing this up, because from my perspective, and this is not the school district's perspective, school is not going to look the same in the fall as it did in February. And it's just not. And as a board, as a district, I don't think we're going to actually know what it's going to look like until late in the summer, because it's going to take us a while to understand all the different constraints and where the virus isn't in our community. And so that's really stressful for everybody to have that uncertainty around what things are going to look like. And I absolutely expect parents to advocate for their children and for their schools and for their communities. But there's that fine line between advocating and burning the house down. Actually, there's not a fine line at all. Please don't burn the house down.
Don't burn a house down. Yeah.
But it's going to be different, and we have to keep our children and our families and our educators safe. And many of us either know people who are immunocompromised or work with people who are immunocompromised, and we have to keep people safe. And I will carry that fight to anybody, and we will. So, and it's going to be stressful and hard, and absolutely, and it stinks. It absolutely stinks.
Yeah. And
we all got to go through it together. Go ahead.
And I do want to push back a little, David, because you said, that's the patriotic thing. You're on a fixed income. It shouldn't be on your back, though. It shouldn't be on the backs of our fixed income people.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't be on the backs of our teachers like it always is. There is a chunk of our population that is doing better under COVID financially than prior, or doing just as well. I think it should be their responsibility to help us get through this, so we're not once again asking for our most marginalized communities to be the ones harmed by all this.
Hey, David, can I just mention just a shout out to the class of 2020. I'm sorry that y'all had to go through this, but any opportunity that I get to shout you out, you all are in a unique situation, and I think you are only going to be better for it. So I just wanted to say that to the class of 2020. We wish you well, definitely.
I mean, yeah, think about it. They were born in the era of 9/11, and now they're going through this now. No pressure, but I have a feeling y'all are going to be that next greatest generation. But no pressure, guys.
They're tough kids.
Yeah, and with that, we're coming up on the hour. If anybody else has anything to say, otherwise, I want to thank you all so much for agreeing to be here. I mean, education is on the forefront of everyone's mind, especially right now with what we're going through. I introduced everyone's name. I kind of had the websites up too. Please engage with these amazing leaders, whether we're talking about leaders in education that are teachers, but also representing the teachers union, but also in the school board. Please, if you want to step up, help them in any way. I know they'd love to have it. My name is David Ortiz. I'm running for the Colorado State House here in House District 38. And really what we are is what you see in front of you. It's about everybody pulling together and offering their perspectives and doing it for our kids and doing it for our future. So with that, I'm going to send us out on some tunes. This has been my favorite song lately. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you.
All right.